My name is Lisa Phillips. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a social worker on the gender affirming services team at Mazzoni Center, and I'm grateful to be able to share this space with you today. I wanted to bring in this nervous system lens to thinking about our mental health and mood because it's been really helpful for me in my own mental health journey. And I think that it can provide some really good insight into how our bodies and brains are responding in times of trauma, grief, and social isolation and social distancing. So, I'm going to provide a lot of information and tools for working with our nervous system. It might not all resonate with everyone. We all have really different life experiences and hold various identities that impact how our nervous systems respond to our environments. So, I encourage you to take what works and leave what doesn't. So, the first part of this webinar, I wanted to talk a little bit about what the nervous system does, how it works. So, the nervous system is made up of all of the nerve cells in our bodies. It controls many of the things our bodies do, some of which are conscious and voluntary, like moving parts of our body, and others are involuntary, so like regulating our heartbeat or regulating our breath. For this webinar, we'll be looking at the involuntary or the parts that we can't control, parts of our nervous system. This is also referred to as the autonomic nervous system. So, the autonomic nervous system or the involuntary nervous system is constantly active, but we don't often have much awareness or control over it. This part of our nervous system receives messages from the brain and passes it along to the body. But it also works in the opposite direction by receiving signals and sensations from the body and delivering them to the brain. This is part of that brain body connection that maybe some of you are familiar with. So, one relevant example of this might be when we watch the news about COVID-19, right? Our brain might detect threat because we're receiving scary information, and our body might respond to that sensed threat by increasing our heart rate. We might start sweating. We might just overall have an increased alertness. So, our bodies move into fight, flight, or freeze because we sense danger, even if we're just sitting on the couch. As a result of these changes in the nervous system, we might experience anxiety, irritability, anger. We might experience a depressed mood. So, while there isn't a direct threat to our physical selves in that moment, our bodies don't know that and they respond as if we're in immediate danger. We're learning from research that humans also need connections to other humans to feel safe, even for those of us who are introverts. Because we're naturally social creatures, when we aren't able to access connection with others, our nervous system also perceives this as a threat of danger and responds similarly. Some of us might be experiencing a more activated state, so think fight or flight, because we're socially isolated, while others of us might be experiencing a more collapsed or frozen state, think more depression. The really challenging part of this is that when we are in these states, it becomes even more difficult to reach that state of connection with others. So it sort of becomes this self fulfilling prophecy where we're feeling lonely and isolated due to lack of connection, but we're struggling to connect because our nervous systems are sensing threat. So, this might impact our self esteem, our sense of self worth, which adds another block to being able to connect with others. So, I gave you some information about how our autonomic nervous system works. I think it's helpful to understand what our bodies and minds are doing in order to develop compassion and patience with ourselves when we're in these states that feel so uncomfortable. In order to begin working with some of this stuff, it can be helpful to remember that our nervous systems are really just trying to keep us safe, especially for those of us who have trauma histories that existed long before COVID-19. So, I want to shift into the second part of the webinar, which is what is my autonomic nervous system trying to tell me? So now that we have some information about how this stuff works, I want to talk about ways that we can check in with our nervous system, with our autonomic nervous system. I think think that when we're in certain nervous system states, like various degrees of fight, flight, or freeze, it can feel all consuming and like there's no end in sight. We can make up stories about ourselves based on our autonomic states, like I'm a really anxious person, or I feel depressed and therefore am a burden to my loved ones. So I found it really helpful to push back against these narratives and make these nervous system states feel more manageable by doing a temperature check. So, one tool that's been helpful for myself and folks that I've worked with has been this idea of the nervous system ladder, which I've pulled from something called polyvagal theory. I'll list some resources on polyvagal theory at the end of this webinar. Highly recommend if you want to learn more about the autonomic nervous system. So, if we envision this nervous system ladder, there are three levels that we move through throughout the day, depending on what's going on and how we're reacting to what's going on. So, if we imagine the bottom rungs of the ladder, this represents what people in polyvagal theory call the dorsal vagal response. I just call this state shutdown. So, in shutdown, we might experience hopelessness, depression, numbness, dissociation, just overall low mood, low energy. There are also things that happen to our body when we're in this shutdown state. Remember that mind body connection? So, our heart rate decreases, our blood pressure decreases, we have a harder time maintaining eye contact with others, we have a harder time discerning facial expressions, we also have less awareness of the human voice. So, now if we shift up a little bit into the middle rungs of that nervous system ladder, that represents our sympathetic nervous system response. So, that's fight or flight. This is where we go when we sense danger or threat. It's a lot more active than that shutdown response. And we might experience this as anxiety, panic, worry. Those are all more flight energies. Or we might experience anger, frustration, irritability. Those are a bit more of the fight energy. So during this state, your heart rate increases, blood pressure increases. You might experience more adrenaline, your pupils get larger, things like that. So now, if we shift up to the top rungs of the ladder, that represents our most grounded and connected nervous system states. In polyvagal theory, this is referred to as the ventral vagal state or social engagement. So, this is the nervous system state where we're able to authentically connect with others. We feel safe, we feel open, and we feel connected, and we feel compassionate. This state can be particularly hard to access right now because so many of us are having nervous system responses that are keeping us in that fight, flight, or shutdown space. So, in addition to being physically separated from community, friends, and family, many of us are also experiencing this emotional distance because we're struggling to stay in that social engagement space where we can connect to others. So, I want to shift into the third part of this webinar, ways that we can work toward healing and regulating our nervous systems. I do want to note here that when thinking about these exercises, that trans and gender nonconforming communities, and really all communities that experience systemic violence, also experience significantly higher levels of trauma. So, for trauma survivors, it can feel really scary to tune into our bodies and minds. Many of us intentionally avoid trying to listen to our bodies because it can feel too painful or overwhelming. So, I want to encourage you to adjust these exercises to what feels tolerable for you in these moments, and just try to stay really compassionate with ourselves. A lot of these nervous system responses are deeply ingrained within us, so this kind of healing work is lifelong for many of us. So, the first exercise that I want to share with you is mapping our nervous system. I think it's really important to understand what each of these nervous system states feels like individually. So, I think it's really important to assign language that feels appropriate for how you experience that state. So, some examples. So, for me, I experienced shutdown as numb, depressed. I even put shame in there, hopeless, alone. So, for fight or flight, some of the language that comes to mind for me when I'm experiencing fight or flight is feeling really critical, feeling suspicious of others, guarded, panic, things like that. So, really thinking about what these states feel like for you and assigning language to each of them so that you're able to identify what you're feeling when you're feeling it. And then the top rungs of the ladder is the social engagement piece. So, in this state, I feel grounded, I feel peaceful, connected, I feel safe. So you can draw out your own ladder or whatever feels relevant to you and just really name what each spaces feel like. So I think it's important to map our nervous system states, and because it also gives us a guide of how we can move through each of the states, especially the less comfortable ones, so the fight, flight, shutdown, and how we can move into a more engaged and connected state. The second exercise I wanted to share with you are some affirmations for our nervous system. So I think it's important to map your nervous system states first so you can really develop some language around what you are experiencing in order to create these affirmations. So, for me, a lot of the nervous system dysregulation is about not feeling safe. So, one of my favorite affirmations is really simple. It's in this moment, I am safe in this moment. And just saying that to yourself when you are feeling that fight or flight or unsafe um, feeling. Some other ones that really resonate with me, you'll create your own. You're also welcome to use these. So, another one I really like is I am doing the best I can with what I have. So, that helps when I get into that really critical space of myself and others. Using that affirmation, I'm doing the best I can with what I have, is really helpful. So, the third example of an affirmation for our nervous system is this is for when we're feeling particularly small or disconnected from others. So I like saying, I'm connected to something bigger than myself. Final exercise that I wanted to share with you on healing our nervous system is body work. So this is pretty big. This is a pretty big topic, but I just wanted to share a couple exercises that feel good for me and that work for me. I think physical movement in general can be really helpful in helping us move through emotional states. This is one of the more grounding exercises for me when I'm feeling dysregulated. It also took me a while to be able to get to this space to do body work. So I think if it's feeling strange or uncomfortable at first, to just be really patient with yourself. This stuff takes time. So, the first thing I wanted to share with you is self massage or self touch. So, one thing I like to do is just massage small parts of my body. So, that can be really helpful in regulating the nervous system and getting you out of that fight, flight, or shutdown. I really like the arms, forearms, the neck, the back of the neck, shoulders, especially if you're on your feet all day. A little foot self massage is really, really nice. Another, if the self massage isn't working for you, another kind of regulating self touch is tapping. So, really just going along different parts of your body and just tapping. And that can be really grounding and help our nervous system. Another one that I really like to do that's a little bit better for more like acute stress or panic is feeling your pulse. My favorite pulse, we have several pulses we can feel, but my favorite one is on the wrist. So it's between the top of the wrist and this middle kind of bone. If you might have to feel around a little bit, but you should be able to feel a steady pulse there. And just putting some light pressure on that and really feeling your pulse beating can be really, really grounding and get you out of that panic state. So another sort of like body work within the realm of body work, nervous system exercise I like to do is stretching. So my favorite thing to do actually is just laying on the ground. If for those of you that do yoga, this is often referred to as corpse pose. So just laying in that position and moving your body in ways that feel good, and just really trying to check in with how your body needs to move in that moment can also bring you out of some of these nervous system responses. And then also, if stretching, if you're having a hard time figuring out what to do with your body, sometimes listening to a low impact yoga video or stretching video can be really helpful and help to get you out of your head and listen to someone else's voice. Um, so, those are some exercises that I like to do to shift my energy out of fight or flight or shut down and into more social engagement. So, yeah, I hope some of this stuff resonated with you, or at least helped to build some compassion for how our bodies and minds are trying to keep us safe. I think we're all learning a lot about ourselves during quarantine, and hopefully, we'll be coming out of this with a lot more tools and awareness about what we need to be well on the individual and community level. Remember to be patient with yourself and take good care of yourself and each other. Feel free to share this video and the rest of this series on social media so we can connect with other folks in community. If you have any questions or thoughts about today's program, feel free to reach out to Elizabeth Kahn at econ, that's KAHN, at mazzonicenter.org. If you or someone you know are experiencing a mental health crisis, there are resources to support you.